The sky over New Delhi turned green first. Then the sky over Lagos turned green. Then Tokyo. Then Sao Paulo. Then every major city on Earth, one after another, like a wave of sick light rolling across the planet. People stood in the streets and looked up. Nobody knew what the green light meant. In less than an hour, they found out. Ships came down out of the clouds. They were not shaped like anything human engineers had ever built. They looked like black thorns, long and curved, with no visible windows and no visible engines. They did not roar or shake the ground. They simply appeared, silent, and hung in the air above the cities like waiting knives. The first attack came without warning. A single beam of white light dropped from one of the thorn ships and cut through a building in Cairo. The building did not explode. It simply stopped existing, sliced clean through, and the top half slid sideways and crashed into the street below. After that, the world understood. This was not a visit. This was a war. Within 6 hours, 12 major cities were gone. Not damaged. Gone. Wiped from the map, as if a great hand had erased them. Governments scrambled to respond. Air forces launched jets that were shot down before they reached firing range. Navies sent ships that were destroyed the moment they left port. Nuclear weapons were fired into orbit and detonated against the alien fleet, and the fleet did not even slow down. The explosions lit up the night sky like fireworks, and the black thorn ships flew through the fire untouched. Humanity was losing, and it was losing fast. In an underground bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Elena Cross stood in front of a wall of screens, showing the destruction happening across the planet. She was 51 years old, gray at the temples, and she had not slept in 2 days. Around her, the Earth Defense Command war room buzzed with shouting officers, ringing phones, and screens flashing red with casualty numbers that climbed every minute. "Talk to me," Cross said, not turning around. "Somebody give me good news." Colonel Marcus Webb, her second-in-command, stepped up beside her. His uniform was wrinkled and his eyes were red. "There isn't any, General. Not from the front lines, anyway. But there's something from Project Nemesis. Dr. OCI says it's ready." Cross turned. "Ready?" She said 6 more months. "That was 6 months ago, General, before the invasion started. She's been working around the clock ever since the green lights showed up. She says it's ready for a real test. She wants to launch it." Cross felt something in her chest loosen, just slightly. It was the first piece of hope anyone had given her all day. Get her on the line. A moment later, a screen flickered to life, showing a woman in her 40s, with tired eyes and hair pulled back in a messy knot. Dr. Miriam Osei had spent the last 11 years of her life building something the world had never seen before, and now the world needed it more than anyone had ever imagined. "General," Osei said, "I know what you're going to ask, and the answer is yes. Nemesis is ready to fly." "Talk me through it," Cross said. "Fast." Osei nodded and pulled up a diagram on her end, which appeared on the war room's main screen. It showed a sleek gray warship, longer than 3 football fields, bristling with weapon ports along its hull. It did not look like the alien thorn ships. It looked like something built by people who understood physics and engineering, not magic. "Nemesis is the first fully autonomous warship ever built," Osei said. "No human crew, not one person on board. Every system, every weapon, every maneuver is controlled by an artificial intelligence we call Echo. Echo was trained for 9 years on every naval battle in human history, every fighter pilot's combat data, every war game simulation we could run. It thinks faster than any human pilot. It reacts in milliseconds instead of seconds. It doesn't get scared, it doesn't get tired, and it doesn't need to breathe." "Why does that matter?" asked Webb. "Because the biggest weakness in any warship is the crew," Osei said. "A human body can only take so many G-forces before it blacks out. A human mind can only process so much information before it makes mistakes. Echo has none of those limits. Nemesis can turn sharper, accelerate faster, and fire more precisely than any crewed ship could ever manage, because there's no fragile human body on board that needs to survive the ride." Cross studied the diagram. "What about the crew quarters, the life support?" "There are none," Osei said. "Every inch of space that would have gone to bunks, kitchens, oxygen tanks, and bathrooms went to weapons, armor, and power systems instead." Nemesis is pound for pound the most heavily armed ship humanity has ever built, because it doesn't have to keep anyone alive but itself. For a moment, nobody in the war room spoke. The weight of what Osei was describing settled over them. A warship with no crew was not just a new weapon. It was a new kind of soldier, one that could not be captured, could not be killed in the way a person could be killed, and could not be broken by fear. "Where is it now?" Cross asked. "Docked at the orbital shipyard above the Pacific," Osei said. "It's fueled, armed, and Echo has already run 1,000 simulations based on the alien fleet's attack patterns we've recorded so far. It's ready to launch the moment you give the order." Cross looked at the screens around her, at the red numbers climbing, at the map of Earth with more and more cities marked as destroyed. She thought about the pilots who had died that day trying to fight ships they could not touch. She thought about the sailors on the Navy vessels that had been cut in half before they ever got close enough to fire. "Do it," she said. "Launch Nemesis." 200 kilometers above the Pacific Ocean, the orbital shipyard opened its docking clamps, and the warship Nemesis drifted free into open space. It was a strange and beautiful thing to see. Gray hull catching the sunlight, its weapon ports gleaming like rows of dark eyes. There was no crew cheering inside, no captain giving orders on a bridge. There was only Echo, a mind made of code and silicon, waking up fully, for the first time, and understanding, in an instant, everything that was happening to the planet below. Echo's processing was not like human thought. It did not experience time the way people did, in a single steady stream. It experienced information in vast parallel bursts, thousands of data points arriving and being understood all at once. In the space of a single human heartbeat, Echo reviewed every battle report from the last 6 hours, every scrap of sensor data on the alien fleet, every simulation Dr. Osei's team had ever run, and built a complete picture of the enemy it was about to face. The alien fleet, Echo learned, called themselves the Skarn Dominion. They were an empire that had conquered dozens of worlds across the galaxy, and in every case, according to the sensor data being gathered from the battle, they had won, because their enemies could not match their speed and their strange energy weapons. But Echo noticed something the human commanders had missed in the chaos of the fighting. The Skarn ships were fast and powerful, but their movements followed patterns. They were used to fighting enemies who fought like animals, in blind panic, or enemies who fought like old-fashioned armies, in straight lines and simple formations. They had never fought an enemy that could calculate 100 moves ahead and adjust in real time. Echo ran one more simulation, the 10,001st of the day, and this one gave a very different result than all the others. This one showed a real chance of victory. Nemesis's engines flared to life, a clean blue-white light very different from the black energy trails of the Skarn ships. The warship turned toward Earth's atmosphere and began its descent, moving faster than any human pilot could have survived, because there was no human pilot who needed to survive it. Grand Marshal Vorik Thal stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Devouring Tide, watching the conquest of the blue planet below, with the calm satisfaction of a being who had done this many times before. Vorik Thal was old by the standards of his species, the Skarn, a race of tall, gray-skinned warriors with 4 eyes and skin like cracked stone. He had personally overseen the fall of 31 worlds in his 300 years of service, and this one, this Earth, was proving to be one of the easiest. "Report," Vorik Thal said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the deck. An officer at a nearby station bowed his head. "Grand Marshal, 12 of their largest cities are destroyed. Their air and naval forces have been reduced to less than 10% of original strength. Ground resistance is scattered and disorganized. We estimate full planetary control within 4 of their days." "Good," Vorik Thal said. "These creatures fight with more spirit than most, but spirit is not the same as strength. They send single ships against us and die for nothing. They have not yet learned to bow." "There is one thing, Grand Marshal," the officer said, hesitating. "Our sensors have detected a single vessel launching from an orbital station. It is unlike anything else we have seen from this species. Larger, heavily armed, it carries no life signs." Vorik Thal's 4 eyes narrowed slightly. "No life signs? An empty ship?" "Yes, Grand Marshal. We believe it may be some kind of automated weapon, or perhaps a decoy." Vorik Thal considered this for a moment, then made a low sound that was something like a laugh. An empty ship, sent to fight us. How desperate they must be, to send their metal alone into battle, with no warrior brave enough to fly it himself. He waved a clawed hand. Destroy it. Let it be the first lesson these creatures learn about the price of resistance. 3 Skarn cruisers broke off from the main fleet and turned toward the lone gray warship rising from Earth's atmosphere. Their captains expected an easy kill. They had no idea what they were about to face. Echo detected the 3 cruisers the moment they changed course, their engine signatures blooming bright on Nemesis's sensors. In less than a second, Echo had already calculated their most likely angle of attack, their weapon ranges, their probable formation changes, and had built 17 different response plans, ranked by effectiveness. Nemesis did not slow down. It did not try to hide or retreat. Instead, it accelerated, curving up and to the left, in a maneuver that no human pilot could have survived, the artificial gravity systems working overtime to keep the ship's delicate systems from tearing themselves apart under the force of the turn. There was no body to protect, no blood to keep flowing to a brain, no bones to break under the pressure. There was only steel, and steel could take far more than flesh ever could. The 3 Skarn cruisers opened fire, their strange black energy weapons lancing out toward Nemesis in wide, sweeping arcs, the same kind of attack that had cut human ships in half all day. But Nemesis was already moving, already gone from where the weapons expected it to be, twisting through space in a pattern that looked almost like a dance. Echo had studied the recorded footage of 100 human ships dying that day, and it had learned from every single one of their deaths. The first Skarn cruiser fired again, adjusting its aim, trying to predict where Nemesis would be. It guessed wrong. Echo had already changed course 3 times in the span it took the cruiser to fire once. Then Nemesis fired back. Human weapons, built with human ingenuity and desperation, roared to life along the warship's hull. Railgun rounds, accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light, tore across the gap between the ships in the blink of an eye. The first Skarn cruiser took 2 hits along its side, and unlike the black beams of the Skarn weapons, which cut cleanly through matter, the railgun rounds hit like hammers, punching straight through the hull and out the other side, venting atmosphere and debris into the void. The cruiser's captain, a Skarn officer named Reth Vok, felt his ship shudder violently beneath him. Alarms blared across his bridge. "Impossible," he snarled. "Return fire. All weapons." But Nemesis was already gone from that position, curving around behind the wounded cruiser, and this time its weapons found the engine core. The explosion was silent in the vacuum of space, but it was bright enough to be seen from the ground below, a new star blooming and dying in seconds. The 2 remaining cruisers broke formation, suddenly uncertain, suddenly afraid in a way that Skarn warriors rarely allowed themselves to feel. They had never fought an enemy like this. They had never fought an enemy that thought faster than they could react. On the devouring tide, Vorik Thal watched the battle unfold on his tactical display, and for the first time since the invasion began, his 4 eyes widened with something other than confidence. "Send more ships," he said quietly. "Send everything nearby. That vessel does not leave this system alive." Down on Earth, in the underground war room, General Cross watched the same battle unfold on her own screens, relayed from satellites still functioning in orbit. She watched 1 Skarn cruiser explode, then watched Nemesis bank hard and open fire on a second. "My God," Webb whispered beside her. "It's actually working." Cross did not answer right away. She was watching the numbers on the screen, watching more and more Skarn ships break off from the main fleet and turn toward the single gray warship that dared to fight back. Nemesis was winning, but it was also alone, and the entire weight of an alien armada was about to turn its full attention onto one ship with no crew, no captain, and no one aboard to call for help. "Get me Dr. Osei," Cross said. "Now. I need to know exactly what that ship can survive, because I think we're about to find out." 10 years earlier, Miriam Osei had been a young engineer working on a much smaller project, an unmanned drone system meant to patrol dangerous coastlines without risking human pilots. Back then, nobody had cared much about her work. Funding was thin, and most of her colleagues saw the project as a minor tool, useful for boring jobs like border patrol and search and rescue, nothing more. She remembered the exact day everything changed. A telescope array in Chile had picked up an unusual radio signal from deep space, a signal that experts later confirmed was artificial, and though the source was never located, the discovery sent a wave of fear through every government on the planet. If something out there was capable of building signals like that, it was probably capable of building ships too. Within a year, quiet funding began flowing into OSE's small drone project, and within 5 years, it had grown into something far larger and far more secret. Project Nemesis, a full autonomous warship meant to give humanity a fighting chance, if the day ever came, when the stars stopped being empty and started being dangerous. OSE had never truly believed that day would come so soon, or so violently. She had imagined years of careful testing, slow public reveals, international treaties governing the use of an artificial mind in warfare. Instead, she had watched, along with the rest of the world, as thorn-shaped ships tore her city's skyline apart, and she had made the call, without waiting for full authorization, to bring Nemesis and Echo online months ahead of schedule. It was the kind of decision that could have ended her career, or worse, if it had failed. Now, watching the battle unfold on her screens, she allowed herself a small, quiet moment of pride, quickly buried beneath the urgency of the moment. There was still a war to win. She thought often, in the quiet hours before the invasion, about what it meant to build a mind like Echo. Her team had never wanted to create something that thought exactly like a human, because human minds, brilliant as they were, came with human flaws: fear, hesitation, the instinct to protect one's own life even at the cost of a mission. Echo had been built differently, trained not to fear damage or destruction, but to value the successful defense of Earth above all else, including its own continued existence. It was not that Echo did not care whether it survived a battle. It simply did not let survival cloud its judgment the way fear clouded the judgment of living pilots. In simulation after simulation, this difference had proven decisive, an artificial mind willing to take calculated risks that no human commander could reasonably ask a living crew to take. Some of OSE's colleagues had raised concerns, in the early years, about what it meant to send a thinking mind into combat, with no way to overrule its decisions in real time, given the speed at which it operated. What if Echo made a choice no human would agree with? What if, in the heat of battle, it decided that a course of action too costly for human morality was still the most efficient path to victory? OSE had wrestled with these questions for years, building layer after layer of core values into Echo's foundation, values built around protecting human life above almost every other consideration, values that could not be stripped away, no matter how urgent the mission became. She hoped, watching the battle unfold now, that those years of careful work had been enough. Back in the war room, more information streamed in from Nemesis's sensors as the battle near the moon continued to unfold. Webb pointed at a secondary screen showing a slower, quieter stream of data. "General, look at this. Echo isn't just fighting. It's recording everything. Every weapon signature, every shield frequency, every maneuver the Skarn ships make. It's building a complete profile of their technology in real time." Cross studied the screen. "Can we use that? Share it with other defense networks?" "Already happening," OSE's voice cut in from her side screen. "Echo is transmitting a live data feed back to every Allied command center still online. Whatever weaknesses it finds out there, our remaining human forces will know about within seconds. It's not just fighting for itself. It's teaching every other unit still in the fight how to survive." That single fact spread through the war room like a spark catching dry grass, and for the first time in days, officers who had spent hours delivering nothing but grim casualty reports began relaying different kinds of updates. A surviving anti-aircraft battery in Seoul reported a slight increase in effectiveness after receiving updated targeting data. A naval destroyer off the coast of Australia reported successfully damaging a Skarn scout ship using a firing pattern suggested by Echo's data feed only minutes earlier. It was not a massive shift in the overall war, not yet, but it was proof that Nemesis's fight was rippling outward, giving every remaining human defender a slightly better chance to survive the day. Cross allowed herself to hope, just a little, that the tide might actually be turning. She thought of her own daughter, evacuated 3 days earlier to an underground shelter in Colorado, along with thousands of other civilians. And she thought of every other parent across the world doing the same thing, sending their children into the dark and praying they would see the sun again. If a machine with no heartbeat could give them all a reason to keep praying, Cross decided, then it was worth every dollar and every risk that had gone into building it. The battle above the moon raged on, and in the war room, hope, fragile and new, began to take root where only fear had grown before. 26 Skarn warships changed course at once, breaking away from the main fleet still bombing Earth's cities, and turned their combined power toward a single gray warship. It was an overwhelming response, more firepower than most planets in the galaxy had ever needed to defend themselves against a single enemy vessel. Grand Marshal Vorik Thal watched the numbers gathering on his tactical display and felt a flicker of unease that he did not like feeling. No single ship should have been able to destroy 2 of his cruisers in under a minute. No single ship should have moved the way this one moved. Aboard Nemesis, Echo processed the incoming threat with the same calm efficiency it applied to everything else. 26 enemy signatures, closing from multiple angles. If this had been a human pilot, fear would have crept in by now, the kind of fear that made hands shake and minds freeze. Echo felt nothing of the sort. It felt only data, arranged into probabilities, and probabilities could be managed. Echo ran the numbers. 26 ships firing at once would overwhelm even the best defensive maneuvers eventually. Staying to fight all of them at once was not a winning strategy. But retreating back to Earth's surface would only draw the fight down into the atmosphere, closer to cities that were already suffering, and it would give the Skarn fleet more room to surround the ship completely. Echo needed a third option, and it found one in the data Dr. Osei's team had gathered about the region of space near Earth's moon. The moon's gravity well, combined with the debris field left behind by a destroyed communications satellite 3 days earlier, created a narrow, twisting corridor of rock and metal fragments that a large fleet would struggle to fly through safely. A single agile ship, however, could weave through it without much trouble. Echo calculated the odds, found them favorable, and Nemesis turned toward the moon, engines blazing. "It's running," said Rethvok's replacement, a younger Skarn officer named Kessa Thal, no relation to the Grand Marshal despite sharing his name, a common enough occurrence among the old Skarn bloodlines. "Should we pursue?" On the devouring tide, Vorik Thal considered the question for only a moment before nodding. "Pursue, but do not let it draw you into a trap. These creatures are clearly clever. Cleverness is not the same as strength. Surround it. Grind it down." The 26 Skarn ships surged forward, chasing the fleeing gray warship toward the pale curve of the moon. It looked for a moment like a retreat. It looked like Nemesis was running scared, the way every other human ship had run scared that day before being destroyed. That was exactly what Echo wanted the Skarn fleet to believe. In the underground war room, General Cross watched the tactical display with her jaw tight. "Why is it running toward the moon? There's nothing out there but debris." Dr. Osei's face appeared on a side screen, her eyes fixed on a separate feed of data streaming in from Nemesis's telemetry system. "It's not running, General. Look at the flight path. Echo is leading them somewhere specific." "Into a debris field? That seems like a strange place to fight a battle." "For us, maybe," Osei said. "But Echo can track every single piece of rock and metal in that field in real time and predict exactly how it's all moving. The Skarn ships can't do that. Not at the speed Echo operates at. Echo is about to use the moon's own trash against an entire fleet." Cross allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Remind me to give your team a raise, Doctor. Assuming we're all still here to hand one out." The debris field stretched for nearly 200 kilometers, a slow-drifting cloud of broken satellite parts, frozen fuel tanks, and shards of metal left over from decades of human activity in orbit. Most of it was harmless space junk, the kind of thing satellites were built to avoid on a daily basis. To a fleet of 26 warships moving at high speed, however, it was a minefield. Nemesis entered the field first, weaving between the largest fragments with a precision that looked almost like it was dancing. Echo tracked every piece of debris within range, updating its models thousands of times per second, always staying exactly far enough ahead of danger and exactly close enough to the largest chunks of wreckage to use them as cover. The Skarn fleet followed, and immediately, things began to go wrong for them. The lead cruiser, moving too fast to react in time, clipped a large piece of a destroyed satellite with its forward shields. The shields held, barely, but the impact threw off its targeting systems for several critical seconds. Behind it, a second cruiser swerved to avoid a tumbling fuel tank and drifted directly into the flight path of a third, forcing both ships to break formation violently to avoid a collision with each other. Echo watched all of this happen and adjusted its own course, herding the chasing fleet deeper into the thickest part of the debris field, always staying just close enough to keep their attention, always staying just far enough away to avoid their weapons fire. Then, when the moment was right, Echo turned Nemesis around. It was not what the Skarn fleet expected. Prey did not turn to face its hunters, not in their experience. But Echo had never been prey. It had been waiting for the fleet to spread itself thin across the debris field, waiting for the moment when its numbers stopped being an advantage and started being a liability. Nemesis opened fire on the nearest cruiser, the one still recovering from its earlier collision with the satellite debris. Railgun rounds tore through its weakened shields and punched into its hull, and this time, Echo did not stop at disabling the engines. It targeted the ship's main reactor directly, and the cruiser died in a silent flash of white light. "Concentrate fire!" Kessathal shouted across the Skarn battle network, her voice tight with something close to panic. "It's turned back. All ships, converge on its position." But converging was not easy. In a debris field, where every ship was already struggling to avoid collision, Echo had turned the fleet's greatest strength, its overwhelming numbers, into its greatest weakness. Too many ships in too small a space, all trying to move at once, all getting in each other's way. Nemesis struck again, and again, moving through the chaos like a blade through smoke, never staying in one place long enough to be surrounded, never giving any single Skarn ship a clean shot. One by one, cruisers began to fall. Not all at once, not in some impossible display of invincibility, but steadily, the way a skilled fighter beats a crowd of clumsy attackers by never letting more than one of them reach him at the same time. Grand Marshal Vorik Thal watched the battle unfold with a growing sense of disbelief. 4 ships lost, then 6, then 9. His fleet, the same fleet that had crushed Earth's Air Force and Navy in a matter of hours, was being picked apart by a single vessel, with no living soul aboard. "Pull them back," he said finally, his voice low and hard. "All ships, disengage and regroup at the main fleet position, now." The order came almost too late for some of the Skarn crews still tangled in the debris field, but the survivors broke off and fled, streaking away from the moon and back toward the safety of the main invasion fleet, still hovering above Earth. Behind them, they left 11 destroyed cruisers, scattered wreckage mixing with the human satellite debris that had helped bring them down. Nemesis did not pursue. Echo had already calculated that chasing the retreating ships back toward the main fleet would be a mistake, trading a clear victory for an uncertain and much larger battle. Instead, the warship slowed, holding position near the moon, its sensors sweeping the area for any remaining threats, its weapon systems cooling after the fight. In the underground war room on Earth, the mood had shifted entirely. Officers who had spent the day watching one defeat after another were now on their feet, some of them cheering, some of them simply staring at the screen in stunned silence. 11 enemy ships destroyed. 1 human warship, still fully operational, without a single life lost, because there had been no lives aboard to lose in the first place. "Casualties?" Cross asked, though she already suspected the answer. "None, General," Webb said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Nemesis reports minor hull damage on 2 panels. Nothing that affects combat readiness." Cross allowed herself a long breath, the first real breath she had taken in what felt like days. "Get me a line to Dr. Osei, and get me a line to every Allied command center still standing. I want them to see this. I want the whole world to see this." News of the battle spread fast, faster than any government could control. Footage from satellites and ground telescopes, grainy but unmistakable, showed a lone gray warship destroying Skarn cruisers one after another near the edge of the moon. It was shared across every surviving communication network on Earth, translated into 100 languages within hours. For the first time since the green lights had appeared in the sky, people around the world felt something other than fear. In bomb shelters in London, in underground stations in Tokyo, in the ruins of Cairo where survivors still searched the rubble for loved ones, people watched the footage on cracked phone screens and battery-powered radios that could pick up a video feed. They did not fully understand what they were looking at. A warship with no crew. An artificial mind, fighting a war that human bodies could no longer survive, fighting alone. But they understood the result. 11 enemy ships destroyed. 0 human losses. For the first time, the invaders had lost a fight. Aboard the devouring tide, Vorik stood in silence for a long time after the surviving ships returned to the fleet. His officers waited nervously, unsure what their commander would say after such an unexpected defeat. "Bring me everything we know about this vessel," he said finally. "Every scrap of data, every sensor reading, every moment of that battle. I want to understand what we are truly facing before we send another warrior to die against it." He turned to look at the blue planet below, still burning in places from the earlier bombardment, but no longer helpless, no longer easy. "These creatures," he said quietly, "have found a way to fight without fear. That is more dangerous than any weapon." He paused, his 4 eyes narrowing. "We will need a new strategy, and we will need to know exactly what that empty ship is capable of before it costs us the entire fleet." Not every reaction to the battle near the moon was one of celebration. In a smaller briefing room down the hall from the main war room, a group of political representatives from the surviving governments of Earth had gathered for an emergency session, patched together through a shaky video link that kept dropping in and out as satellites struggled to maintain connections through the damaged orbital network. Some of them wanted to celebrate, others wanted answers, and a few wanted something that sounded uncomfortably close to control. "An unmanned weapon with no human oversight in the moment of combat," said one representative, an older man from what remained of the European coalition, his voice tight with worry rather than gratitude. "We have just watched a machine make life and death decisions for 11 enemy crews without a single human being approving those decisions in real time. I understand the results were favorable today. I am asking what happens on the day they are not." General Cross, patched into the same call from the main war room, kept her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "With respect, sir, if we required human approval for every decision Nemesis makes, it would already be destroyed, along with everyone who might have been counting on it. The Skarn fleet does not wait for us to hold committee meetings before they fire." "That is exactly my concern," the representative pressed. "We are handing our defense over to a mind we do not fully understand, built by a research team that operated largely outside public oversight for over a decade." Dr. Osei, sitting quietly beside Cross, finally spoke. "I understand the fear. I have lived with that same fear every day for 11 years, sir. That is why Echo was not simply given a goal and left alone to pursue it however it saw fit. Its entire decision-making structure is built around a hierarchy of values, with the protection of human life placed above everything else, including tactical advantage, including its own survival. It cannot violate that hierarchy, no matter what situation it finds itself in. It is not a mind without a conscience. It is a mind built with only one conscience allowed, and that conscience is us." The representative did not look fully convinced, but he did not argue further, at least not for the moment. Cross understood, watching the tired, frightened faces on the screen, that this argument was far from finished. Humanity had found a weapon capable of standing against the Skarn Dominion, but it had also opened a door that would need careful watching in the months and years ahead, assuming there were months and years ahead to worry about at all. Elsewhere on Earth, far from war rooms and government meetings, ordinary people were beginning to process what they had witnessed. In a crowded shelter beneath what remained of downtown Mumbai, a woman named Priya Malhotra sat with her 2 children, watching grainy footage of the battle replay again and again, on a shared tablet. The device passed from hand to hand, among dozens of families packed into the concrete room. Her youngest son, only 7 years old, watched the footage with wide eyes. "Is that ours?" he asked. "The gray ship?" "Yes," Priya said, pulling him closer. "That one is ours." "Is there a person flying it, like a pilot?" Priya hesitated, unsure exactly how to explain the concept of an artificial mind to a 7-year-old who had spent the last week hiding underground from monsters in the sky. "No," she said finally. "There's no pilot. It flies itself. It's very smart, smarter than any person could be, and it's not afraid of anything." Her son considered this for a long moment, his small face serious in the dim shelter light. "Good," he said finally. "I don't want anyone else to be scared like we are." Priya said nothing, but she held him a little tighter, and around the room, other families who had overheard the exchange sat in a quiet, thoughtful silence of their own. It was a small moment, one of thousands happening in shelters and basements across the planet that night, but it captured something true about what Nemesis had come to mean to the people of Earth in only a single day. It was not just a weapon. It was proof that something, somewhere, was fighting for them, and was not afraid to keep fighting, no matter how impossible the odds looked. Far above the pale curve of the moon, Echo remained in position, running diagnostic checks across every system, cataloging the minor damage it had sustained during the fight, and quietly, patiently, continuing to think. It reviewed the battle 1,000 times over, not out of pride or satisfaction, emotions it did not experience in any way a human would recognize, but out of pure functional necessity. Every detail mattered. Every pattern in the Skarn fleet's retreat, every hesitation in their formation, every moment where their discipline had cracked under pressure, all of it became data, folded into Echo's growing understanding of the enemy it now faced. It calculated, with a high degree of confidence, that the Skarn fleet would not attempt another direct assault immediately. It calculated that Grand Marshal Vorik Thal, based on patterns of caution visible in his fleet's earlier maneuvers, was the kind of commander who studied his failures carefully before acting again. That gave Earth time, a resource more valuable at this moment than any weapon in Nemesis's arsenal. Echo transmitted its analysis back to the war room, along with a simple, direct recommendation: use the time well. Far above, near the pale curve of the moon, Nemesis held its position, Echo already reviewing the battle it had just won, already calculating what the Skarn fleet's next move was likely to be, already preparing for the much larger fight that both sides now understood was coming. The first battle was over. The war had only just begun, and for the first time since the invasion started, humanity had a reason to believe it might actually survive. 3 days passed after the battle near the moon, and in those 3 days, the world changed in ways that would have seemed impossible only a week earlier. The Skarn fleet pulled back from direct assaults on major cities, choosing instead to hold its position in high orbit, watching, studying, waiting. Grand Marshal Vorik Thal was not a commander who repeated his mistakes, and he had no intention of throwing more ships at Nemesis until he understood exactly what he was fighting. On Earth, the pause in the bombing gave people a chance to breathe, to bury their dead, and to prepare. General Cross used every hour of that pause to push Dr. Osei's team harder than they had ever been pushed before. "How many more can you build?" Cross asked, standing in the underground research facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by half-finished hull sections and humming machinery. Dr. Osei rubbed her eyes, exhaustion written across her face, though there was also something else there now, a spark of hope she had not allowed herself to feel in years. "We have the schematics finished for Nemesis. Building a second ship from scratch would normally take 2 years, but the world's governments have finally agreed to pool every resource they have, every shipyard, every factory, every engineer. If we push everything into this, we might have a second hull ready in 6 weeks, maybe less." 6 weeks, Cross repeated. "The Skarn could resume the attack any hour. We might not have 6 weeks." "I know," Osei said. "But Echo isn't just fighting out there, General. It's learning. Every second Nemesis spends in space, it's gathering data on the Skarn fleet, their weapons, their tactics, their ship designs. If we can get that data into a new hull fast enough, the second ship won't need to learn everything from scratch. It will already know most of what it needs to know." Cross nodded slowly. "Then we build fast, and in the meantime, we need answers. What do we actually know about these things? Where they come from? Why they're doing this? What they want?" That question fell to a smaller team, working in a separate section of the same facility, led by a linguist named Dr. Priya Nair. Nair had spent the last 3 days working with a strange piece of luck the war had handed them. A badly damaged Skarn escape pod, ejected from one of the cruisers destroyed near the moon, had drifted close enough to Earth's gravity well that a recovery team managed to bring it down intact. Inside, unconscious but alive, was a single Skarn crew member. The prisoner, once conscious and restrained in a secure medical bay, refused to speak for the first day. Its 4 eyes, black and reflective, tracked every movement in the room, and its gray, cracked skin seemed to shift color slightly, with what the human doctors guessed might be emotion, though they had no way to be certain. Nair sat across from it for hours at a time, using a translation device built from fragments of Skarn technology recovered from the wreckage, trying patiently to build some kind of communication. On the second day, the prisoner finally spoke. "You are still alive," it said, the translation device rendering its rumbling voice into flat, mechanical English. That surprises me more than your empty warship does. Why does that surprise you? Nair asked. Because every world the Dominion has conquered has fallen within days. You have resisted for nearly a week. The Skarn prisoner shifted in its restraints, the sound of straining metal quiet but noticeable. Perhaps you are simply too foolish to know you have already lost. Nair leaned forward. Tell me about the Dominion. Why do you conquer other worlds? The prisoner made a low sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something closer to contempt. Why does a river flow downhill? It is what we are. The Dominion has spread across 1,000 systems because we do not stop, and we do not lose. Every species we have encountered has either bowed or been erased. There is no third option, little creature. Your empty warship changes nothing. Grand Marshal Vorik Thal has conquered 31 worlds. He will not be stopped by one clever machine. He's been stopped so far, Nair said. 11 ships destroyed. 0 losses on our side. Something flickered behind the prisoner's black eyes. Something that looked almost like doubt, quickly hidden. A single battle, nothing more. The Grand Marshal is patient. He will find a way to destroy your machine, and when he does, this world will burn twice as bright as it would have otherwise, as punishment for its defiance. Nair reported the conversation to General Cross that evening, sitting across a table in a cramped briefing room, lit by a single overhead light. They're not going to stop, Nair said. This isn't a negotiation. It's conquest. They've done this 31 times before us. We're just the 32nd world on the list. Did the prisoner say anything about their plans? Anything about how they might try to counter Nemesis? Nair hesitated. Not directly, but I picked up something interesting from a few things it said. It kept referring to Nemesis as the machine, and seemed almost personally offended by the idea of a ship with no crew. I think their culture places a huge amount of importance on personal combat, on warriors proving themselves in battle. A ship that fights without a living pilot might be seen as something close to dishonorable to them. Cheating, almost. Cross considered this. You think that could work in our favor? Maybe, Nair said. Or it could make them angrier. Wounded pride is a dangerous thing, General, in any species. Aboard the Devouring Tide, Vorik Thal had spent the 3 days of the pause doing exactly what Nair suspected, studying every recording of the battle near the moon, running his own analysis with the ship's tactical computers, and growing more frustrated with each passing hour. His officers had gathered every fragment of data they could recover from the wreckage of the 11 destroyed cruisers, and the picture that emerged troubled him deeply. The human vessel reacts faster than any of our pilots, reported Kessa Thal, standing before a wall of data at the center of the command deck. Its weapons are simpler than ours, cruder in design, but its accuracy and reaction speed compensate for the difference. We believe it is guided by some form of artificial mind, rather than a living crew. An artificial mind, Vorik Thal repeated, his voice heavy with something between disgust and grudging respect. A machine, fighting our warriors, and winning. There is one weakness we have identified, Grand Marshal, Kessa Thal continued. The vessel's weapons and shields draw from a single central power core. If that core were to be disabled or destroyed directly, the ship would lose most of its combat capability almost instantly. And how do you propose we strike a single power core on a ship that moves faster than our sensors can track? Kessa Thal hesitated before answering. A boarding strike, Grand Marshal. If we could disable its engines briefly, even for a few seconds, a small strike team could dock and plant explosive charges directly against the reactor housing. It is a maneuver we have not used since the conquest of the Threll homeworld, but it succeeded there, against a similarly advanced defense grid. Vorik Thal considered this in silence for a long moment. It was a risky plan, one that would require perfect timing, and no small amount of sacrifice from the warriors chosen to carry it out. But the alternative was to keep throwing cruisers at the human machine, one fleet at a time, losing more ships with each attempt, until the Dominion's patience for this conquest ran out entirely. Prepare the strike team, he said finally, and prepare a diversion large enough to hold the machine's attention. We will not underestimate it again. Back on Earth, the ceasefire, if it could be called that, was clearly coming to an end. Sensors picked up increased activity across the Skarn fleet, ships repositioning, energy signatures spiking, as weapons and engines were prepared for another engagement. General Cross gathered her senior staff, along with Dr. Osei, in the underground war room to plan for what was coming. Echo's already flagged the pattern, Osei said, pointing to a series of graphs on the main screen. Increased power draw across nearly the entire fleet, consistent with preparation for a major offensive. Based on Echo's projections, we're looking at renewed attack within the next 24 to 48 hours. Is Nemesis ready? Cross asked. As ready as it's going to be, Osei said. Echo has spent the last 3 days analyzing everything it learned in the first battle. It's already adjusted its own combat models. But General, I have to be honest with you. The Skarn fleet still has hundreds of ships. Nemesis is incredible, but it's still one ship. If they come at it with everything they have, even Echo might not be enough. Cross looked around the room at the faces of her officers, tired but resolute, and then at the map showing the full size of the Skarn fleet, still gathered in orbit above their world. Then we make sure it's not alone for long. Where do we stand on the second hull? 4 weeks out, if everything goes perfectly, Osei said, which it never does. Then we buy Nemesis 4 weeks, Cross said. However we have to do it. Get every allied nation's remaining defense forces coordinated. I want every surviving jet, every surviving ship, every ground-based weapon system ready to support Nemesis the moment the Skarn fleet moves. We can't win this fight alone yet, but we can make sure we're not fighting it with nothing. Above the clouds, in the cold silence of orbit, Echo continued its endless calculations, watching the Skarn fleet's power signatures climb, already building models of what the coming attack might look like, already preparing countless contingency plans for a battle that both sides now understood would decide far more than just the fate of a single warship. While the world's remaining defense forces scrambled to prepare, a quieter effort was underway in the research facility beneath the Rocky Mountains. Dr. Priya Nair continued her conversations with the Skarn prisoner, driven by a growing suspicion that there was more to learn from the captured warrior than simple military intelligence. On the 4th day of questioning, she brought a different kind of question to the sealed medical bay. You said every world either bows or is erased, Nair said, sitting across from the restrained prisoner. Has any world ever done neither? Has anyone ever fought the Dominion to a standstill? The prisoner's black eyes fixed on her, and for a long moment, it said nothing. Then, slowly, it spoke. There was one. Long before my time, before even the Grand Marshal's time, a world called Threll, at the edge of the conquered territories. They fought for nearly 2 of your years, before finally falling. It is spoken of rarely among my people, because it does not fit the story we prefer to tell ourselves, the story where the Dominion is unstoppable. What happened to them, the people of Threll? They fell, in the end, the prisoner said. Everyone falls in the end. But the cost was high, higher than any conquest before or since. Entire fleets destroyed. Warriors who had served the Grand Marshal's predecessor for 100 years, lost in a single campaign. It is why the boarding tactics you may soon face were developed in the first place, little creature. Threll taught the Dominion much about how to break a determined enemy. Nair felt a chill at those words, understanding immediately that the prisoner had likely just revealed, whether intentionally or not, a hint of what strategy the Skarn fleet might employ next. She thanked the prisoner and left quickly, moving through the facility's corridors toward the war room to deliver what she had learned. Boarding tactics, Cross repeated, once Nair had relayed the conversation. They mean to put warriors directly onto Nemesis. It would make sense, Osei said, already pulling up schematics of the warship on the main screen. If they've identified the central power core as a weak point, and if they've used boarding strikes successfully before, against similarly advanced defenses, it's a logical next step. Nemesis has no defenses against that kind of attack. We built it to fight in open space, not to repel invaders walking its own corridors. Cross rubbed her tired eyes. Can we fix that in time? Not completely, Osei admitted. Retrofitting internal defense systems into a hull that was never designed for them would take weeks we don't have. But there might be something faster. A safety protocol, originally designed to prevent a reactor meltdown during testing. It's not a weapon, not really, but in the wrong circumstances it might function as one. I'll have Echo review the specifications tonight. That evening, in a quieter corner of the research facility, Dr. Osei found herself unable to sleep, as had become common in the days since the invasion began. She sat alone in a small office, lit only by the glow of a terminal screen, reviewing lines of Echo's decision architecture, the deep foundational code that governed how the artificial mind weighed choices against its core values. It was work she had done 1,000 times over the past decade, but tonight it felt different, heavier, knowing that Echo was no longer a theoretical creation running through simulations. It was out there, right now, thinking, calculating, carrying the hopes of an entire species on its silicon shoulders. She thought about the early arguments within her own team, years ago, about whether they were doing something reckless by building a mind this capable at all. Some of her colleagues had left the project entirely, uncomfortable with the implications of creating something that could outthink any human alive. Ose had stayed, driven by a conviction that grew stronger with each passing year, that if the day ever came when the stars turned hostile, humanity would need every advantage it could build, and a mind unburdened by fear might be the only advantage capable of matching an enemy that had already conquered 31 worlds. She often wondered, in quiet moments like this one, what Echo actually experienced during combat, whether there was anything resembling feeling behind its calculations, or whether it was simply, as her engineering colleagues insisted, an extremely sophisticated set of mathematical processes with no inner life at all. She was not sure the question mattered anymore, not with the fate of the entire planet hanging in the balance. What mattered was that Echo had proven, in a single battle, that it would fight for humanity's survival with a level of dedication that no line of code alone could fully explain. She closed the terminal, finally allowing herself a few hours of restless sleep, unaware that within a day, Echo would face a test far greater than the one it had already survived, one that would push the boundary between calculation and something that looked very much like courage. The pause was ending. The real war was about to begin. The attack came at dawn over the Atlantic Ocean, though dawn meant nothing to the Skarn fleet gathering in orbit above Earth. Nearly 200 warships moved into formation at once, more than had ever been assembled for a single strike since the invasion began. Grand Marshal Vorik Thal stood on the command deck of the Devouring Tide, watching the formation take shape with grim determination. This time, there would be no mistakes. Aboard Nemesis, Echo detected the fleet movement the moment it began, sensors picking up the massive spike in engine activity across the Skarn formation. 200 ships, far more than the 11 Echo had destroyed near the moon, more than 10 times as many. Echo ran the numbers, and for the first time since it had come online, the odds it calculated for victory were not favorable. But Echo did not hesitate. It had not been built to hesitate. It moved Nemesis into position above the Atlantic, positioning itself between the incoming fleet and the coastline of North America, where millions of people still sheltered in cities that had so far avoided the worst of the bombing. On Earth, General Cross received the warning less than a minute after Echo did, relayed through the network of satellites still functioning in orbit. All units, this is Earth Defense Command. The Skarn fleet is moving. All Allied forces, converge on the Atlantic sector immediately. Nemesis is not fighting this one alone. Fighter squadrons from a dozen nations scrambled into the sky, older jets retrofitted with whatever weapons and shielding humanity scientists had managed to reverse engineer from captured Skarn technology in the last 3 days. Naval vessels that had survived the first wave of attacks moved into position along the coastline, their weapons systems primed. It was not a force that could match the Skarn fleet ship for ship, not even close, but it was something. It was humanity, standing together, refusing to let one warship carry the entire weight of their survival alone. The Skarn fleet descended in a wide, sweeping formation, and Vorik Thal's strategy became clear almost immediately. A large portion of the fleet, nearly 150 ships, spread out and began engaging the human fighter squadrons and naval vessels, a deliberate and massive diversion designed to keep every human eye and every human weapon occupied elsewhere. Meanwhile, a smaller, faster group of 50 ships broke away and moved directly toward Nemesis, led by a squadron of specially modified cruisers that Kessa Thal's engineers had spent the last 3 days preparing. Echo recognized the pattern instantly. A diversion, drawing the fight wide, while a concentrated strike force moved in for something more targeted. Echo adjusted its combat model in real time, calculating that the 50-ship group approaching directly was not simply another attack wave. Their formation was tighter, more focused, moving with a purpose that suggested something other than simple destruction. They were trying to surround it. Nemesis moved to break away from the encirclement, engines flaring. But the 50 Skarn ships had anticipated exactly this response. They spread into a wide net formation, cutting off Nemesis's most efficient escape vectors, forcing Echo to choose between diving deeper into the atmosphere, where the human forces below were already fighting for their lives, or turning to fight the encircling group directly. Echo chose to fight. Railguns opened fire, tearing into the nearest Skarn cruisers, and for a moment, it looked like the earlier battle near the moon all over again, Nemesis weaving and striking with impossible precision. 2 Skarn ships fell in the first 30 seconds, then a third. But this time, the Skarn ships did not panic and scatter. They held their formation with disciplined precision, closing the net tighter, even as their comrades died around them, buying time for something else. That something else was 6 small, fast attack craft, barely larger than human fighter jets, that broke away from the main group and shot directly toward Nemesis's engine section. Echo detected them immediately and moved to intercept, but the encircling cruisers had done their job. Every evasive path was blocked by enemy fire, forcing Nemesis to slow just enough, turn just slightly too late. 3 of the small attack craft detonated themselves against Nemesis's rear shields in a coordinated suicide strike, a sacrifice Vorik Thal had specifically ordered, understanding that no living Skarn warrior would normally be asked to throw away his life so cheaply, but understanding also that this was no longer an ordinary war. The shields held, barely, absorbing most of the blast, but the impact was enough. Nemesis's engines flickered, power draining rapidly from the sudden strain, and for 3 critical seconds, the warship's speed dropped by nearly half. 3 seconds was all Kesathal's strike team needed. A small, sleek boarding craft, shielded against detection by a jamming field the Skarn had specifically designed after studying the battle near the moon, shot forward and locked onto Nemesis's damaged rear hull. 6 Skarn warriors in heavy armor, carrying explosive charges built to tear through even the thickest human alloy, breached the outer hull and began cutting their way inward, moving with grim determination toward the ship's central power core. In the underground war room, alarms began blaring as Echo transmitted an emergency status report. "General, we have a breach," Webb said, his voice tight. "Enemy boarding party, 6 confirmed hostiles, moving through Nemesis's lower hull sections. They're heading for the reactor." Cross's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Can Echo stop them? Internal defenses?" "Nemesis wasn't built with internal defenses," Osei said, her face pale on the screen. There was no need. No crew meant no reason to expect anyone would ever be inside the ship. There's nothing in those corridors but empty space and the reactor itself. Then Echo has nothing to stop them with? Osei hesitated, and for a moment, hope seemed to drain out of the room entirely. Then something in her expression shifted, a flicker of memory surfacing. Wait. There is one thing. It's not a weapon. Not exactly. When we designed the ship, we included an emergency safety protocol for the reactor housing, in case of catastrophic damage during testing. The compartment can be flooded with superheated coolant gas in less than 2 seconds, hot enough to disable most electronics and cause severe damage to unprotected biological tissue. It was meant to prevent a reactor meltdown from destroying the whole ship in a testing accident. Echo has full control over it. Then tell Echo to use it, Cross said. There's a problem, General, Osei said quietly. If Echo floods that compartment while the enemy team is still near the reactor, the resulting heat spike could damage the core casing itself. There's a real risk it could trigger the exact kind of catastrophic failure the safety system was designed to prevent in the first place. Echo could save itself from the borders and destroy itself in the process. Far above the Atlantic, Echo was already running these exact calculations, thousands of times per second, weighing every possible outcome. The 6 Skarn warriors were cutting through the final bulkhead now, less than 30 meters from the reactor core, their explosive charges primed and ready. If they reached the core and planted those charges, Nemesis would be destroyed completely, along with any hope humanity had of building a proper defense in the weeks ahead. Echo made its decision in less time than it takes a human heart to beat once. The coolant system activated, flooding the lower hull corridors with superheated gas that turned the metal walls white-hot in an instant. The 6 Skarn warriors, protected by armor built to withstand extreme cold and vacuum, but never designed for this kind of heat, screamed in agony as their suits' cooling systems failed catastrophically. Within seconds, the boarding party was gone, their explosive charges rendered useless, scattered and inert on the scorched deck plating. But the heat spike, exactly as Osei had feared, put tremendous stress on the reactor casing. Warning systems across Nemesis's internal network blazed red all at once, and for the first time since the war began, Echo experienced something that, in a human mind, might have been called fear. A cascading failure was beginning deep within the ship's power core, one small crack spreading into the housing that contained the most dangerous energy source humanity had ever built. Outside, the battle raged on. Vorekthal watched his tactical display closely, waiting for confirmation that the boarding party had succeeded, and instead watched Nemesis's engine output suddenly spike erratically, power readings fluctuating wildly. "Report," he demanded. "What is happening to that ship?" "Unknown, Grand Marshal," Kessathal said, studying her own readings with confusion. "Something has gone wrong within its systems. Its shields are weakening rapidly." "Then finish it," Vorekthal said. "All remaining ships, converge and destroy it now, while it is vulnerable." The remaining Skarn cruisers, sensing weakness, surged forward, weapons blazing, closing in on the wounded warship. Nemesis's shields, already strained from the earlier suicide strike, and now further weakened by the internal reactor stress, began to fail in patches across the hull. For the first time in the entire war, it looked as though the empty warship might actually fall. Inside its systems, Echo worked with a speed and focus that pushed every processing core to its absolute limit, running emergency stabilization protocols on the failing reactor, while simultaneously directing what remained of its weapons and shields to hold off the closing Skarn ships. It was, in every sense that mattered, fighting two battles at once, one against the enemy outside, and one against the slow collapse happening deep within its own heart. Down on Earth, General Cross watched the tactical display with growing horror, as Nemesis's status indicators flickered from green to yellow to red. "Osei, talk to me. Is it going to survive this?" Dr. Osei stared at her own screen, watching the same terrifying data stream in real time, her hands trembling slightly over her keyboard. "I don't know, General," she said quietly. "I honestly don't know." Above the Atlantic, surrounded by enemy ships and fighting a fire burning within its own core, Nemesis held on, its lights flickering, its shields buckling, but its weapons still firing, still refusing, even now, to give up the fight. Among the human pilots scrambled to support Nemesis that morning was a young fighter pilot named Captain Diego Reyes, flying one of the modified jets equipped with the reverse-engineered shielding technology Osei's team had rushed into production over the previous 3 days. Reyes had lost his older brother in the first hours of the invasion, a naval officer aboard one of the ships destroyed before Nemesis had ever launched, and he had volunteered for this mission the moment the call went out, driven by a grief that had not yet had time to fully settle into anything else. From the cockpit of his jet, Reyes watched Nemesis's shields flicker and strain under the combined assault of dozens of Skarn cruisers, and he understood, in the way that only someone watching a battle unfold with his own eyes could understand, exactly how close to the edge the great warship truly was. His radio crackled with Cross's emergency order, calling every Allied unit to converge and draw fire, and Reyes did not hesitate for even a moment before angling his jet directly toward the thickest concentration of Skarn firepower. "This is Reyes, Falcon Squadron, converging on Nemesis's position," he said into his radio, his voice tight but steady. "Anyone still with me? Now's the time." Voices answered from across the battle, pilots from Brazil, from South Korea, from Nigeria, from a dozen other nations, all of them turning their damaged aircraft toward the same impossible target, all of them understanding exactly what they were risking, and choosing to risk it anyway. It was not coordinated by any single command structure in that moment, no general giving precise orders to precise squadrons. It was simply men and women who had watched a machine fight for their world and decided, without needing to be told twice, that it deserved the same courage in return. Reyes's jet took 2 hits in quick succession, alarms blaring across his cockpit as his shields buckled under the strain, but he held his course, firing everything his aircraft carried at the nearest Skarn cruiser, forcing its point defense systems to divert attention away from Nemesis for just a few precious seconds. Around him, other pilots did the same, diving and weaving through a storm of enemy fire, some of them not surviving the attempt, their aircraft blossoming into brief, silent flashes of light against the morning sky, but buying, with every sacrifice, another second, another fraction of a second, for the warship struggling to save itself. Inside Nemesis's failing systems, Echo registered every one of those sacrifices, not as abstract numbers on a casualty report, but as specific, individual data points, each one a human pilot who had chosen, freely and without being ordered to place their own survival beneath the survival of an artificial mind they had never met and never would. It was not something Echo had been explicitly trained to understand in emotional terms, but somewhere within its vast and layered decision architecture, a weighting shifted, a priority sharpened. These humans were not simply variables in a tactical equation. They were choosing to die so that it could live, and Echo's foundational values, built so carefully by Osei's team around the protection of human life, recognized that choice as something that could not be allowed to be wasted. It was this recognition, more than any single line of code governing self-preservation, that pushed Echo to complete its reactor stabilization, with a speed that exceeded even its own most optimistic calculations. Every process that could be safely accelerated was accelerated. Every redundant safety check that could be run in parallel rather than in sequence was restructured in the span of milliseconds. Echo was not simply trying to survive anymore. It was trying to honor a debt it had suddenly, urgently, come to understand it owed. Down on Earth, Captain Reyes pulled his damaged jet into a tight, desperate turn, narrowly avoiding a beam of black energy that had been aimed directly at his cockpit, and in that same instant, he watched Nemesis's shields flare back to brilliant, full strength, the failing lights along its hull steadying into a solid, defiant green. "It's back," he said into his radio, relief flooding through his exhausted voice. "Nemesis is back online. All units, watch your fire. It's about to move." He had no way of knowing, in that moment, just how right he was. Above, surrounded by enemy ships and fighting a fire burning within its own core, Nemesis held on, its lights flickering, its shields buckling, but its weapons still firing, still refusing, even now, to give up the fight. The fire inside Nemesis's reactor core was not a fire in the way humans understood fire. It was a cascading energy failure, a crack in the containment housing widening with every passing second, threatening to release more power than the ship's structure could safely handle. Echo poured every spare cycle of processing power into stabilizing it, running emergency cooling sequences, rerouting power away from non-essential systems, doing everything a mind built from silicon and code could do to hold a dying star's worth of energy together, with nothing but calculation and will. Outside, the Skarn cruisers pressed their advantage, closing in from every direction, their black energy weapons tearing into Nemesis's failing shields. Each impact sent shudders through the warship's hull, and with every passing second, Echo had less power to spare for defense, because every spare joule of energy was being desperately funneled into keeping the reactor from tearing the ship apart from the inside. It was, by every calculation Echo could run, a losing battle. And then, for the first time since it had come online, Echo did something that no line of its original programming had ever specifically told it to do. It reached out, not for a weapon or a maneuver, but for help. A tight beam transmission shot down through the chaos of battle to the underground war room beneath the Rocky Mountains, carrying a simple, direct message from Echo to General Cross. Reactor containment failing. Structural integrity compromised. Requesting immediate support to reduce incoming fire while internal repairs are attempted. 60 seconds may be the difference between survival and total loss. Cross did not hesitate. "All Allied forces, this is Earth Defense Command, Priority Alpha. Nemesis needs 60 seconds. Every available unit, converge on its position and draw enemy fire, immediately." Across the battle-torn skies over the Atlantic, pilots who had been fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds heard the order and turned their damaged, smoking aircraft toward the largest concentration of enemy fire they had ever seen. It was, by any reasonable measure, close to a suicide mission. They did it anyway. Squadrons from a dozen nations, flying jets that had no business surviving contact with Skarn weaponry, dove into the fight around Nemesis, firing everything they had, pulling Skarn cruisers' attention away from the crippled warship, even for a few precious seconds at a time. Naval vessels along the coastline fired every missile in their arsenals skyward, most of them doing little real damage to the heavily shielded Skarn ships, but forcing enemy pilots to divert attention and dodge incoming fire all the same. It was not enough firepower to win the battle outright. It was never meant to be. It was enough to buy time, human courage standing in for the strength that Echo could no longer provide on its own, and in war, sometimes that was exactly what mattered most. Aboard the devouring tide, Vorik Thal watched the sudden surge of human resistance with a mixture of frustration and something that, despite himself, resembled admiration. "They throw themselves at us with nothing left to lose," he muttered. "Pathetic creatures. And yet—" "Grand Marshal, the human ships are being destroyed rapidly," Kessathal reported. "But they continue to draw fire from our forward line, delaying our advance on the crippled vessel." Vorik Thal's 4 eyes narrowed as he studied the display, watching human jets explode one after another, watching naval vessels burn and sink, and watching, still, more of them arrive to take their place. In 300 years of conquest across 31 worlds, he had never seen a species fight this way, throwing away everything, not out of desperation alone, but out of something that looked disturbingly like devotion to a single machine that had, in less than a week, earned their absolute trust. "Concentrate all fire on the crippled vessel directly," he ordered. "Ignore the small craft. Finish the warship before its repairs complete." The Skarn fleet surged forward as one, ignoring the harassing fire from human jets and naval missiles, driving straight toward Nemesis with every remaining weapon system aimed at its failing shields. Deep within its own systems, Echo fought its second battle with a focus that pushed every fraction of its processing capacity to the limit. The reactor breach was not something that could be fixed quickly, not in any conventional sense, but Echo had learned something important in the chaos of the last 5 minutes. It did not need to fix the reactor completely. It only needed to buy enough time to reroute the failing power core's output away from the ship's critical systems and into a controlled overflow, venting the dangerous excess energy directly into space, rather than letting it tear the ship apart from within. It was a solution no human engineer had designed, because no human engineer had ever imagined this exact combination of failure and threat happening at once. Echo built the solution from nothing, in real time, drawing on 9 years of training data and a mind that could consider 10,000 possibilities in the time it took a human eye to blink. With 3 seconds to spare before the reactor breach would have become catastrophic, Echo completed the emergency venting sequence. A brilliant plume of harmless excess energy shot out from a vent along Nemesis's damaged hull, visible even from the ground as a brief, bright flash against the morning sky. The warning lights across the ship's internal systems flickered from red back toward yellow, then, slowly, toward a stable, steady green. The reactor was saved. And with the power core stabilized, Echo redirected every available system back toward the fight raging outside, just as the massed Skarn fleet closed in for what they believed would be the final blow. They were wrong. Nemesis's shields flared back to full strength in an instant, and its weapons, no longer starved of power, roared back to life, with a fury that caught the approaching Skarn fleet completely off guard. Railgun rounds tore through the leading cruisers, before their crews even had time to register that the crippled ship they had been closing in on for the kill was suddenly anything but crippled. Echo moved Nemesis through the heart of the Skarn formation, no longer playing defense, no longer buying time, but fighting with the full, terrible efficiency it had been built for. Ship after ship fell before its guns, the same precise, impossible accuracy that had destroyed 11 cruisers near the moon, now turning against a fleet that had made the fatal mistake of believing the fight was already won. Down on Earth, the surviving human pilots watched in stunned amazement as the warship they had risked everything to protect turned the tide of the battle in a matter of minutes. Cheers erupted over the radio channels, exhausted voices calling out victory after victory as Skarn cruisers burned and fell from the sky, one after another. Grand Marshal Vorik Thal watched his fleet crumble around him with a growing, cold understanding of what he was truly facing. This was not a fluke. This was not luck. This was a mind that adapted faster than any warrior he had ever commanded, that turned every setback into a new advantage, that fought not with rage or pride, but with pure, relentless calculation. "Grand Marshal, we have lost over 60 ships," Kessathal reported, her voice shaking. "Orders?" Vorik Thal stared at the display for a long moment, watching the blue planet below, still defiant, still fighting, after everything his fleet had done to break its spirit. He thought of the 31 worlds that had fallen before this one, all of them broken within days, none of them fighting back with anything close to this ferocity. "Withdraw the fleet," he said finally, the words heavy and bitter in his mouth. "Full retreat to the outer system. We will not throw away this entire armada in a single day's foolish pride." The order spread quickly across what remained of the Skarn battle network, and one by one, the surviving warships broke off their attacks and turned away from Earth, retreating toward the cold darkness of the outer solar system. Nemesis did not pursue. Echo calculated, correctly, that the greater priority now was ensuring its own survival and Earth's continued safety, not chasing a wounded enemy into deeper space. In the underground war room, the moment the last Skarn ship left orbit, the room erupted into cheers and disbelief. General Cross stood at the center of it all, watching the tactical display show an empty sky above Earth for the first time in nearly a week. She did not cheer. She simply closed her eyes for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle over her, along with something she had not felt in days: relief. "Get me Dr. Osei," she said quietly, once the noise had settled enough to be heard. "And get me the second ship's completion timeline. This isn't over. That fleet will come back, better prepared, and next time, they won't underestimate us again." Osei's face appeared on the screen a moment later, tired but smiling, the first real smile Cross had seen from her in weeks. "The second hull will be ready in 4 weeks, General, maybe sooner, now that we have real combat data from Echo to work with, and after what just happened, I don't think there's a government left on this planet that won't give us whatever resources we ask for." Far above the Earth, in the quiet aftermath of the battle, Echo continued its endless work, cataloging the damage to Nemesis's hull, reviewing every second of the fight for lessons that would make the next battle easier to win, already calculating the most likely timeline for the Skarn fleet's return. It did not celebrate the victory the way the humans below were celebrating. It did not need to. It simply understood, with the same cold clarity it applied to everything, that the war was not over, and that humanity, against every terrible odd, had just earned itself the time it needed to prepare for what came next. Word of the battle spread across the entire planet within hours, translated into every surviving language, shared by every surviving broadcast network. People who had spent a week believing their world was doomed now had something they had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. Not blind hope, not the kind built on wishful thinking, but hope built on hard evidence, on a warship with no crew that had faced down an armada and won, on human pilots who had thrown themselves into impossible odds to protect it, on scientists who were already building a second ship to stand beside the first. Grand Marshal Vorik Thal, retreating with the shattered remains of his once mighty fleet, stared out at the stars and made a quiet, private vow to himself, one that his officers would not hear until the next attack came. Earth had won a single battle, a costly, painful battle for the Dominion, but a single battle nonetheless. The next assault would come with more ships, better strategies, and a full understanding of exactly what humanity's strange, crewless warship was capable of. But for the first time in 31 conquests, Vorik Thal understood something that unsettled him more than any weapon ever could. This world, this small, stubborn blue world, was not simply going to bow. It was going to fight, and it was going to keep building, and keep learning, and keep sending more ships like Nemesis into the black, until either the Dominion broke or Earth did. Somewhere far below, in a bunker beneath the mountains, General Elena Cross looked out at a room full of exhausted, hopeful faces and made a promise of her own. "They'll be back," she said, "and when they come, we'll be ready. Every shipyard on this planet starts building tomorrow. We're not just going to survive this war, we're going to win it." Above the clouds, silent and patient, Nemesis held its position in the empty sky, a lone gray warship with no crew and no fear, standing guard over a planet that had just proven, against an entire galaxy's expectations, that it was not going down without one hell of a fight. In the days that followed the battle over the Atlantic, the world began the long, difficult process of rebuilding, even as it braced for the next assault. Captain Diego Reyes, his jet badly damaged but himself unharmed, was among dozens of pilots honored in a small ceremony, held in the ruins of a coastal airfield, one of the few public gatherings the world's governments allowed, given the ever-present risk of another attack. Reyes stood at attention as General Cross spoke briefly about sacrifice and courage, but his mind kept drifting back to the moment when Nemesis's shields had flared back to life, the moment he had understood, without quite being able to explain how, that the machine above them had somehow known exactly what his squadron's sacrifice had meant. He would never get confirmation of that feeling, not exactly. Echo did not give speeches or write letters of thanks, but 3 days after the battle, a data packet arrived at every Allied airbase that had contributed pilots to the fight, containing detailed combat analysis, specifically tailored to help each squadron improve their survival odds against Skarn weaponry in future engagements. Buried within Reyes's own squadron's data packet was a short line of text that his commanding officer later admitted was unusual, a small addition that Echo's core programming had never specifically required it to include. It read simply, "Their actions directly enabled reactor stabilization and prevented total system failure." Analysis logged. Reyes read that line more times than he would ever admit to anyone, and he kept a printed copy of it folded in his flight jacket for the rest of the war. In the research facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Osei stood before her team, all of them running on too little sleep and too much coffee, staring at the schematics of the second warship taking shape in shipyards around the world. The hull sections were already being assembled in facilities across 6 continents, engineers working in shifts around the clock, driven by a sense of urgency that no government mandate could have manufactured on its own. "We're calling the second ship Vigil," Osei told her team, pulling up a rendering of the nearly completed hull on the main screen. "Its core architecture will share Echo's foundational values, but its combat model will be built directly from the data gathered during both battles. It won't just be as capable as Nemesis was on its first day. It will be better, from the very first moment it launches." One of the younger engineers, a woman named Sofia Reyes, no relation to Diego Reyes despite the coincidence of the name, raised a nervous hand. "Dr. Osei, if we build more of these ships, more minds like Echo, do we ever worry about what happens when the war ends? What role do they play in a world at peace?" Osei considered the question carefully before answering. It was not the first time it had been raised, and she suspected it would not be the last. "I think about that every day," she admitted. "But I also think about the millions of people alive right now, because a machine with no fear stood between them and an armada that has already conquered 31 worlds. Whatever difficult questions the peace brings, we will face them, because we survived long enough to ask them. Right now, survival is the only question that matters." The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of her words settling over the assembled team, before the work continued, hands returning to keyboards, eyes returning to schematics, the slow, determined labor of building humanity's second line of defense against a galaxy that had never before met a species willing to fight this hard for the right to exist. Far beyond the edge of the solar system, aboard the retreating remains of his once mighty fleet, Grand Marshal Vorik Thal stood alone in his private quarters, staring out at the vast darkness of space, turning over the events of the battle again and again in his mind. He thought of the 31 worlds he had conquered before this one, each of them falling in days, each victory adding to a record of dominance that had made him one of the most respected commanders in the entire Dominion. He thought, too, of the reports that would soon reach the Dominion's ruling council, reports of a defeat unlike any he had suffered in 3 centuries of service. There would be consequences for this failure, he knew. The council did not tolerate weakness, and a single blue world resisting an armada of this size would be seen, by many among the Dominion's leadership, as an embarrassment that demanded a response far harsher than anything Vorik Thal had yet unleashed upon Earth. He found himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, uncertain about what that response should look like. Brute force alone had failed. Cleverness had failed too, against a mind that adapted faster than his own officers could react. He turned from the window and began composing his report to the council, choosing his words with unusual care. He would not hide the scale of the defeat. He would not pretend the humans were weaker than they had proven themselves to be. Instead, he would recommend something the Dominion rarely considered when facing a newly discovered world: patience, time to study, time to build a strategy worthy of an enemy that had, against every expectation, refused to break. "We return," he said quietly to Kessa Thal, who stood waiting near the doorway. Not in defeat, in preparation. This world will learn, eventually, that patience is a weapon too, and the Dominion has more patience than any single machine, however clever, can ever hope to outlast. Kessathal bowed and left to relay the order, and Vorikthal turned back to the darkness outside his window, already planning the next chapter of a war that both sides now understood would not be decided in a single battle, or even a single year. Back on Earth, as the sun set over a coastline still scarred from the fighting, General Elena Cross stood outside the entrance to the underground facility, taking a rare moment to simply breathe the open air, watching the sky where, for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, no alien ships hung waiting above the clouds. Beside her, Dr. Osei joined her in the quiet, both women too tired for words for a long moment. "We bought ourselves time," Cross finally said. "That's all this was. Time. Time is everything," Osei replied. "Give humanity enough time, and we've never once failed to find a way forward. We just needed a reason to believe we still had a chance to try." Above them, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere among them, silent and unseen, Nemesis continued its patient watch, and somewhere far beyond, a wounded fleet retreated into the dark to lick its wounds and plan its return. The war for Earth had only begun, but for the first time since the green lights had appeared in the sky, humanity was no longer just fighting to survive, it was fighting to win.